So I did a presentation on abortion and ethics and a little bit about the law the other day, and I thought I would record it here. So I got two questions for you. What should we think about abortion in terms of ethics and the law? And backstory, what should we think about controversial issues in general, or how should we think about controversial issues in general? And this presentation is available online at abortionarguments.com, and you know that because you're watching it. All right, come on, button. All right, so in response to my first question, here's what I think we should think about abortions. We should think that most abortions are not morally wrong, and since morally wrong things should be legal, most abortions should not be illegal or criminalized. Now, why think that? Well, I think this is because beginning fetuses lack which gives anybody the right to life or makes something or someone typically wrong to kill. So why is that? Well, because beginning fetuses and embryos have never been conscious or aware in any way. They don't have what makes us wrong to kill. They're not conscious or aware, feeling, anything like that. There's not even like an us. There's no someone or subject there because there's nothing or nobody that's conscious. All right, so another consideration is the right to life, and the right to life does not seem to be a right to somebody else's body. So that would mean that embryos and beginning fetuses do not have a right to the woman's body. So the law should not criminalize her saying, sorry, I'm not going to let you use my body. Now, my focus is on early abortions, most abortions. What about far later abortions that are relatively rare? Well, I think that some of them could be wrong. That's possible. But I do think criminalizing them would be complicated and problematic, so it's likely a bad idea. So my focus here is on these sort of ethical issues, philosophical issues. Abortion is a very complex issue, and some parts of it I am not the best person to talk to about. So I try to stay in my lane, so to speak. All right, so how should we think about these sorts of issues? I think basically it comes down to critical thinking, which involves evaluating definitions carefully, evaluating explanations, and using some like literal logic to evaluate arguments. So two questions to think critically that I will often ask are, why think that, and what do you mean? How should you not think about these issues? Well, here are two thoughts. Don't rely upon your initial feelings and judgments, which can be mistaken, distorted, manipulated. That's especially the case with this topic. The other concern is to not appeal to your tribe or sort of the group that you most identify with. People often approach issues with like, well, what do my people think about this topic? And go with that. And this leads to ignorance, prejudice, lack of understanding, and denying that there's expertise in the matter, all sorts of problems. So relevant terms here: avoid confirmation bias, confirm what your prejudices are, motivated reasoning, try to reinforce your assumptions, echo chambers, that's just kind of talking to people you agree with, not knowing what other people think, not understanding them, demonizing other people, denying that their expertise. People often think they're experts on areas that honestly they know very little about. So the goal is to see things from an informed and impartial perspectives. All right, so about me, you can find out about me later if you want, or in other ways. So I want to note that oftentimes when you ask people, what do you think about the ethics of abortion, they begin with circumstances. You know, I think abortion's wrong when, blah, blah, blah. I think it's okay if, blah, blah, blah. So they give a bunch of circumstances, and that's fine, but then the question is, well, why? Like, why do you think it would be wrong in these circumstances? Why do you think it would be permissible in these circumstances? That's where, the real action is. Just saying circumstances doesn't tell you why. I do want to observe that most people think that abortion is either sort of prima facie wrong or prima facie permissible, in contrast to it sort of being absolutely wrong or necessarily wrong. So in particular, even people who think that abortion is wrong tend to think there are circumstances where it could be okay, if not even obligatory. So they think it's what's called prima facie wrong. All right, next. Many people give what are called question-begging arguments about abortion. These are arguments where the reason given just assumes the conclusion. And this is a type of circular reasoning. It is always bad. And it's always bad whatever you think about the issue. So here's one example among many. Abortion is wrong because abortion is murder. Well, what does murder mean? Murder means wrongful killing. So this person is basically saying, well, it's wrong to kill fetuses to end pregnancies because it's wrong to kill fetuses. That is just circular reasoning. That is assuming what you need to argue for. So here's a list of question-begging arguments that are pretty common, and you could look at our book, Thinking Critically About Abortion, to see why these are all question-begging. Next, it's also very common for pro-choice people to give question-begging arguments. A lot of common slogans and bumper stickers that people give are question-begging arguments. So here's one. Abortion is permissible because abortion is a personal choice. Well, what do you mean by a personal choice? Well, people often mean like, well, that's a choice that a person could make, and whatever choice they make just wouldn't be wrong. You know, like what color shirt to wear is a personal choice. Red or blue, it doesn't matter. It's a personal choice. Is arson a personal choice? No, of course not, because burning down buildings is prima facie wrong. So if you call abortion a personal choice, you're basically saying it's not wrong. So maybe it's not, but this argument doesn't show it. So there are many question-begging arguments here. And again, you could check out the book and other sources to find those. They're always bad. It's like even if you think abortion's permissible, you don't want to give a question-begging argument because it's just a bad argument. All right, next, people often fixate on when life begins. It's a very common question. And we need to ask, well, what do you mean by life? One answer is biological life. Well, embryos and fetuses are clearly biologically alive. But is it true that anything biologically alive is prima facie wrong to kill? No. Mold, bacteria, plants, those are all biologically alive. They are not wrong to kill. So this is an unsound argument. These counterexamples show that this argument is unsound. Now somebody might say, oh, I didn't mean that. You know, I meant that fetuses are human. They're human life. Well, that also is true if by you mean human, like biologically human. Embryos and fetuses, assuming we're talking about the ones found in women and girls, you know, we're not talking about cats and dog abortions. They are biologically human. They're of the human species. But next, anything biologically human is prima facie wrong to kill. Well, here we want to be very literal and think about what we mean. You know, what if there was like a blob of biologically human cells, like some cheek cells? What if there was some human tissues? What if there was even like a biologically human organ that was somehow alive? Would it be wrong to kill those cells, tissues, organs? No. I mean, especially in the case of the cells and tissues, and if we don't need the organ, we could kill the organ too. So just because something's biologically human doesn't mean it's wrong to kill it. So this argument is unsound. Now, people might say, well, that's not what I really meant. I meant that fetuses are living biologically human organisms. They're not just merely alive. They're not just merely biologically human. They're organisms. That's good. They should say that in the first place. That would be really helpful. But to make this argument work, make it logically valid, as it said, we need to think that anything that's a biologically living human organism is prima facie wrong to kill. Okay, now we're somewhere interesting. We need to think about, well, is this true? Why is it true? And a thought is this. Well, you might think, well, we are biologically human organisms. Are we wrong to kill because we are biologically human organisms? Well, now we are at an interesting, challenging question. So what makes us typically wrong to kill? Is it because we are biologically human organisms, or is it something else? And by the us, I think the us includes like babies and mentally challenged people, emotionally challenged people. So I think many people think the best sort of broad answer to why we are wrong to kill will appeal to our minds, our consciousness. So we are conscious and sentient beings, and that means we got a perspective on the world. There's a way it is to be us, and given that, our lives can go better and worse from our own point of view, and that means that we can be harmed, we can be made worse off, and all that contributes to why killing us is prima facie wrong. So why are we typically wrong to kill? Well, because we're like that. Rocks are not like that. Well, rocks obviously aren't alive. Plants are not like that, even though plants are biologically alive. A blob of cells is not like that, even though it's biologically alive. So does this explanation apply to human embryos and beginning fetuses? No, they're not conscious in any way, and they have never been. They're not aware of the world, don't have any sort of consciousness, etc., etc. Why is that? Well, because they don't have any brains or nervous systems or anything. All right, so there was a recent article in a well-known philosophy journal, Utilitas. Does abortion harm the beginning fetus? And the answer, they argue, is no, because the fetus doesn't have a well-being level. It can't take a turn for the worse. All right, are we wrong to kill because we're persons? Well, it depends on what you mean by persons. You're a person. What makes you a person? Why are rocks, skin cells, livers, plants not persons? What's the difference? What could end your personhood? These are some important questions to ask, to think about what personhood is. What would end your existence as a person? Death, coma, brain death? If you think you could continue to exist after the death of your body, how could that be? Well, many people somehow think that, your memories, mind, knowledge, personality somehow can transfer to, and continue to exist without a body or in a new body. Well, that stuff seems to be like your person, so that's suggestive to what persons are. Could there be like a person swap where one person goes into another person's body? What is it to personify something? What sort of fictional beings would count as persons? So here's some questions, and I think this will take us to a view on personhood that's from John Locke, updated from John Locke, that basically like persons are like psychological beings. They're conscious, aware, feeling beings that are unified over time. That's roughly what it is to personify something, give it a mind, give it a consciousness, give it a personality. This is sort of how we could exist over time. Exist like into an afterlife, if you think that's possible. This goes into a new body, so on and so forth. And, this seems to explain why we are persons and these other things are not. Seems to explain why our personhood could end. So what's important here is to notice that, there's a difference between being a person and a biologically living human organism. And to take this to abortion, well, embryos and beginning fetuses, again, are not like this. So a little aside, earlier we looked at some arguments about life and human being, and I think these terms can mean different things. They can have a sense that's not sort of merely biological. I had an article about this topic recently in Salon. All right, there's another explanation of personhood that says, well, we are persons because we're sort of part of a species that includes rational beings. And I'm just going to say I don't think this is a correct or the best explanation given these other questions. But I don't have time to talk about that right now. All right, the right to life. Well, one thing is that the right to life does not seem to be a right to somebody else's body. How could you get the right to somebody else's body? And in particular, could a non-conscious, non-person being like an embryo get a right to somebody else's body? I don't think so. But we need to discuss this more later. All right, what about later abortions? Well, I think later abortions, far later abortions, potentially could be wrong. That's possible. But I do think that criminalizing them, given that many of them are done for medically justified reasons, I think that would cause a lot of problems. So we'll have to talk about this more another time. All right, so in sum, the main argument is this. It's prima facie permissible to kill things that aren't conscious and have never been conscious. Early abortions kill fetuses that aren't conscious and have never been conscious. Most abortions are early abortions, so most abortions are morally acceptable. The main action is with this first premise, and the two basic considerations given for the first premise are that things that are not conscious and have never been conscious are definitely not persons. And things like that can't be harmed. Things can't go worse for them. All right, so in conclusion, here is what I have argued. And this is a short overview of this presentation. I hope it's helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Check out the book, too. And that book, of course, is the Thinking Critically About Abortion book.